Let's talk for a second about the conference schedule next year, Florida's schedule specifically. Really, the SEC didn't do Napier or Florida any
No.
favors. And then you couple that with the fact that Florida didn't do Florida any favors with Florida State and UCF on the schedule. Is this the toughest schedule in college football next year?
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. And it's that's the idea that it's the conference schedule. I don't really subscribe to that. You could go look at. I mean, yeah, it's tough. Don't get me wrong. Florida, in terms of just conference schedules, yeah, Florida's up there. There's no doubt about that. But the reality is that okay, you add in Miami, Florida State, and UCF,
Yeah.
right? If it's not the out if not for the out of conference schedule, we wouldn't be like, damn, Billy's can't do this, right? We'd be like, yeah, that kind of sucks. That's it. It's just when you combine it with the out of conference schedule and the fact that I think Florida State's still going to be solid. They hit the transfer portal well. I'm not the biggest DJ Uiagalelei fan, but I think he's much better than he showed at Clemson. And I think obviously with Miami, we'll see what Cristobal does, but it's still a very tough, above average program, especially for a team like Florida that is struggling. So, and then UCF, I believe in UCF, I really do. If not for the out of conference schedule, I think a lot of us would be looking at, okay, yeah, it's tough, but if Billy goes 8-4, or 7-5, or 8-4, then he's fine. 7-5, that's a problem. Now it's like, okay, he's going to go 7-5, and nobody's going to be satisfied with that,
Yeah.
even though that'd probably be a minor miracle at this point.
Sure. Do you think that when we look at this and we say, man, what a tough schedule, that part of that is just where Florida is versus what the schedule itself actually says? Because when you break it down, a lot of those teams are bringing in new quarterbacks or they're bringing in new coaches. Like, is it that tough because Florida isn't good? Is it that tough in name only? I mean, or is it really just that tough?
Well, it certainly doesn't help that Florida's kind of a disaster right now. But to me, I think, if Florida's a top 5 team in the SEC, yeah, the perspective might be a little different. But, a top 5 team in the SEC means playoff team
Sure.
now, right? So I think that's a long way to go for any team outside of, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, whoever. So yeah, a little bit, I think the fact that Florida struggled plays into, that perception. But I mean, no matter where you are, even if you're Georgia, you're looking at that going, yeah, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem. Might lose 2 of those. And so if one of the top teams or the top teams in the SEC still look at that schedule and like, yeah, there are a lot of landmines. It is what it is at that point. And so, it is definitely based on a little bit of perception as to where Florida is, but I think it's anybody.
Yeah.
Anybody would look at that and be like, God dang, we got to play those teams.
I think the conference did a decent job making everybody's schedule relatively equal and pretty difficult all the way across the board, which, is that a good move or a bad move? Essentially, we're moving into this 12-team playoff. So because the conference is so strong, because we have these schedules where powerhouses continually play each other week in and week out, the entire season for the SEC is going to produce fun games every single week. Does that make it more likely to get more SEC teams in, or do these really tough schedules potentially keep somebody who deserves to be in out?
Yeah, I think it can work both ways. And not to dodge the question, I think for any given year, what happens if you have 2 undefeated group of 5 teams, or whatever we're calling the group of 5 now? Now, if you have 2 undefeated group of 5 teams, one of those SEC teams is going to be out.
Yeah.
Even if one of those teams doesn't gobble up one of those automatic bids, you're not going to keep an undefeated Liberty out. You're not going to keep an undefeated, Georgia Southern out. Like, it's just not going to happen. So it really depends on the group of 5. And that's the same way for the Big Ten too. I think the general idea is, yeah, the SEC is going to get 3 or 4 teams in. The Big Ten is going to get 3 or 4 teams in, right? I think the fourth is directly tied to what happens with the group of 5. Because if you have, one undefeated team gobbling up that 5th automatic bid, you might have another one that's a top 10, top 12 team. And that's gonna be enough. So, yeah, I mean, I think it could do more damage, but again, I think it's also related to the fact that a lot of these teams already have built-in non-conference games that are tough.
Yeah.
Right? You look at them, you're like, okay, that's why Florida's schedule is so tough. They didn't foresee all of this happening 10 years ago, 8 years
Sure.
ago when some of these contracts were locked in. So I think it will even out. Kind of once we go through that, or ESPN buys out some of those games that are scheduled for 27, 28, 29. But I think if the SEC is going to be in some trouble if there are two group of five teams that are worthy, at least worthy in terms of what the parameters are. They're not worthy of a championship, but that's another rant for another day for me. But the schedule makers for these programs, for these teams, the presidents, the ADs, they might look toward the future and be like, you know what? We don't need two tough out of conference games. Let's just do one, because we also might have a ninth conference game, starting in 2026.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you hanging out with us today. Tell everybody where they can check you out because you've recently moved.
A lot of places. College football smothered and covered. You can subscribe on YouTube, Rumble for video, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I mean, all that stuff. You can read it Outkick. You can follow the Braves Report podcast on the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is a lot of fun for me right now as well. And then SiriusXM every Sunday morning, but also kind of throughout the week, wherever they need me, which is going to be in a lot of places now that basketball season is over.
Barrett is everywhere is the moral of
It's a lot. Like when people ask me that now, I'm like, okay, here we go.
Where am I not? That will be a quicker
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Not covering soccer, thankfully.
We appreciate you breaking some time off to talk to us on our little YouTube channel over here. This was fun. We're going to have to do it again.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.